Blessings be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings be upon you all, and welcome to CAIR Michigan's webinar, where we will be discussing how to utilize American history to navigate through the current climate. My name is Zainab Fahas. I am CAIR Michigan's Director of Safe Spaces, and I will be your moderator for this evening. I'm pleased to introduce my colleagues. With me, I have Imam Dawood Walid, who is CAIR Michigan's Executive Director, and I also have Sister Amy Ducre, who is CAIR Michigan's one and only staff attorney. Assalamu alaikum, both of you.
Wa alaikum salam.
So before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items that I want to go over. So the first, if you are currently watching this, that means you're watching via YouTube or Facebook. So be sure to share the video so that your friends and followers can watch along with you. Follow us on social media, whether that is subscribing to our YouTube page, liking us on Facebook, or following us on Instagram and Twitter. All of our social media handles are CAIR Michigan, so very easy to find. And last but not least, we would love to hear from you guys during this discussion. So if you have questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the comment section on YouTube or Facebook, and we will get to those as soon as we see them. So without further ado, let's get started. First, I wanted to ask Brother Dawood, how do you think we can utilize American history to navigate through this current climate?
Well, I think I'll start off with the famous quote from the American Muslim human rights leader and also a socio-political icon in the African-American community, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, also known as Malcolm X, may Allah be well pleased with him, when he said, "Of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research." Again, of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. So as Muslims, as people of good conscience in America, whether you subscribe to the Islamic faith or not, that in order for us to evaluate how we can move forward as a society to make this society more just, and even to understand the socio-political climate that we're in right now properly and thoroughly, that we can get to the solutions for the future as far as organizing, as far as public policy, even as far as preaching in religious institutions. We have to understand the basis, so the foundation of how this country got started, and this cannot be done without history. And if I can just paint a very quick picture, that in the book of the Muslims, the last revealed scripture, the Quran, where Almighty God talks about striking the parable of a good word being like a good tree, in which roots go down to the ground and whose branches reach up into the sky. And the Prophet, praise and peace be upon him, said that this is an-nakhla. This is the date palm tree. So sometimes when we see things, we see the fruit from a tree. we don't sometimes think that as the tree, before it produces the fruit, grows upward, the roots are actually growing downward too and becoming solidified, right? So this is basically when we talk about history and the anchoring of our discussions. This is why I tried to paint this picture as given in the language of the Quran about how there's this solidifying of certain things in American society, and these are like the roots, and then we have the soil, and then what we see going on today from undocumented children who are immigrants being thrown in cages to Black human beings continuously being beaten and shot by the police. When we see the issue of the abuse of the Indigenous population or Native American population and reservations and the crimes that are done, etc., this goes back to the very foundation of these United States of America. So this is the importance of studying history.
Yeah, if I could just say something on top of that. Also, when we talk about racism, sometimes people think that racism, it just means the act, somebody committing an act or saying a pejorative to somebody. But really, when we're talking about racism in America, we're talking about the systems and the structures of racism. And in order to understand why certain things systemically have racist outcomes, we have to see how they started and understand the history of how they developed from racist ideology to become a system of oppression that we're seeing today. And because racism is just so much more than just somebody on the subway making a slur to somebody else. So it's very important to understand how the structures that have been put in place over history really lead to a lot of the systemic racism problems that we have in the United States.
To both of your points, it seems like the only way we can know where we're going is if we understand where we came from. So I do want to ask both of you, what historical events do you see repeating themselves today? Because as we hear too, history repeats itself, and that's why we can learn from it. So what do you think are, some things that we see happening right now that we may have seen before that maybe we have not learned from yet?
If I could go first, I think some of the things that we see happening today that are definitely history repeating themselves. This is the third anniversary of the march in Charlottesville that led to the death of that activist. And what we saw in that march was people who were white supremacists out in the open, marching with torches, using anti-Semitic slurs and racist slurs to, call for a movement. And it harkens back to Germany, right? So we see this rise in the ability of white supremacist ideology resurfacing throughout the United States and really globally. So that's one of the things that's repeating itself, not to mention we have a broader understanding of police brutality and the systems of police brutality that have taken place. And it's not like it ever went away, but we see it coming to surface more because now there's more spotlight on it because of the ability in real time to show what's taking place. So I think some things are coming back and some things are just continuing, but we have quicker access to information now. So we see them more readily than we did in the past.
Yeah. Well, if I can just add on and bring it specifically to the Muslim community and our concerns with surveillance, and shout out to Brother Akil Fad, who's a researcher. I know he's planning on hopefully, God willing, publishing a book soon. He actually shared something, and this is other documentation's been written about, but this may strike some of you as being quite surprising who's watching right now. So the Detroit Tribune, which is a defunct paper right now, they wrote, they had on the front page on Saturday, August 8th, 1942. And the headline on the front page was, "Report Detroit Muslims Under Surveillance of FBI." So this is August 8th, 1942. So we go up in history almost 80 years, right? And American Muslims still have the same concerns about the history of surveillance and targeting of the American Muslim community, where we have people in the higher echelons, upper echelons of the federal government who've written policies to treat American Muslims as a perpetual type of fifth column or some sort of group that's collaborating with outsiders who aren't Americans to undermine the American way of life, right? So this is no new political discourse that's been weaponized against American Muslims, which then has led itself into public policy and we can even go back before then, even to World War I, but for them, there's been immigration issues and policy and surveillance of the American Muslim community, really going back to World War I, actually, in American history. So when we talk about concerns of FBI coming in Dearborn and other places and knocking on people's doors and asking people questions, or harassing our imams, or harassing community activists. Well, the FBI was doing that back in 1942, right? And they were doing it in 1979, 1980, and in the early 90s, and shortly after 9/11. And these are, as Sister Amy said, these aren't just specific individual acts. These are something systemic in nature that's been part of public policy in the United States of America for decades. That's also informed by cultural racism, because cultural racism also informs the systemic racism that is shored up by bad laws and bad policies.
There's a common misconception I hear a lot. Islamophobia was sort of created shortly after 9/11, but people don't really understand the history of Islamophobia in America. So when you talk about, societal racism and such, how is it that we haven't learned from these, historical mistakes that we've been creating for generations? Is it a spiritual problem? Is it a societal problem? Why is it that we keep making these same mistakes and find history repeating itself in negative ways?
Well, there's spiritual issues and also intellectual deficits, right? So I'll start with the intellectual part first. And for the most part, Americans aren't taught proper history in public school. As a matter of fact, we are taught explicitly, or also through symbols and language, American exceptionalism, that we're the beacon of hope, that we are like our water is proverbially colder than the rest of the world, that we are an exceptional nation. Republicans and Democrats say this equally. They use this type of jargon, this type of rhetoric, and it goes back to how we are miseducated going through the American school systems about our own history. As Dr. Carter G. Woodson wrote for the African Americans, he wrote a book. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, by the way, he was the second African American to receive his PhD from Harvard University. He wrote a book called Miseducation of the Negro. Now, we don't use this language today, Negro, but he's speaking more even about the miseducation of everyone that's here in America. That's number one, right? So that's one thing. I would say the second point is that when we tend to discuss the issues of bigotry or racism or xenophobia, we only tend to talk about it as something that is only a socio-political issue. So if we only march, or if we only change some laws, then the racism will go away. When in fact, from an Islam perspective, we believe that racism is only a manifestation of diseases of the heart, right? Which there are a number of those. There's arrogance, there's envy, and there's also compounded ignorance that relates to these spiritual diseases. To name a couple of them that informs racism. So diseases of the heart cannot be legislated away any more than the Quran mentions that backbiting and scandal mongering is forbidden. But because that ruling is there, does that stop Muslims from gossiping and backbiting and defaming people's character and gossiping and getting involved in foolishness? Of course it doesn't. Why? Because it's not an intellectual thing. If you ask any Muslim about that, they'll say that's haram, that's forbidden to backbite or to slander, but it's the issue of the heart. It's not an issue of just simply knowing the law or knowing the rulings, right? So that's also part of the issue where we as Muslims have to harness our spiritual capital to help bring about transformation here in America. But again, we have to have the right grounding in our spiritual tradition and understanding the history of our own tradition, besides the history of these United States of America.
Yeah, In line with Muslims harnessing their own spiritual power, we also have to realize that we have to harness our own intellectual and political power as well. Islamophobia, people think it came after 9/11, and they really think that Islam came here to the United States sometime after 9/11. But Islam was known to the founding fathers. Like, if you go back and you read documents and you read transcripts about what the founding fathers were talking about, even at the time that they were drafting the Constitution, Islam was known to them. And Islam, they read the Quran, they talked about what would happen if a Muslim became president. So there was Islamophobia inherent in even in the founding fathers, and in the way that this country was founded. And if we understand that, and we know that there were Muslims here long before the founding fathers were here, and that's something we have to educate ourselves about, so that we can understand what our place is and what our presence is, so that we can tell our own story and we can get our own word out. And that's what I mean by harnessing our own political power and our own intellectual power. Because right now everybody's telling our story and they're not telling it correctly. Like, we need to have more people who understand what happened and what's taken place, so that we can tell our own story.
Right. And just to add on, like, and just, I say camelback, I don't want to say piggyback because I don't like to deal with pigs, but what Sister Amy said, like, of the hundreds of enslaved Black people that George Washington owned as chattel, like cows or chickens, three of them were Muslims for sure. At one time, it was probably 5 at one time he owned, but he probably owned more Muslims than that, right? Or at least people came from Muslim lineage, and those people didn't have the freedom to practice their faith on the George Washington plantation. And there were slave codes that were even written in the South, where Muslims by law could not read, right? Could not teach their children how to write, that they would be flogged or whipped if they were seen making salah or reading the Quran out loud, right? So, but again, when people say that, try to paint like Islam is something new to America, most of these people who say that, or many of them, their ancestors came much later, after the first Muslims were here making salah. Many of them wrote the Quran from memory. And one Muslim, Bilali Muhammad, who was in Georgia, he actually wrote from memory a treatise of Maliki fiqh, the Risala, or the treatise of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qirawani. He wrote this from memory in Arabic, right? So, I mean, we're not just even talking about just general. I mean, it's inhumane to treat any human being like a cow or a horse, but we're talking about, there were even Islamic scholars who were here that were enslaved, that were more literate than the people who owned them as property, right? So this is a lot of invisible Muslims or hidden history that, firstly, our own Muslim brothers and sisters need to learn it, because most of us don't even know this history, right? Much less, how can we tell the broader American society about our historical standing here in America when we don't even know our own history?
So, in speaking on, how much we need to learn about our own American history to understand where we are today, CAIR Michigan is excited to announce a class series that we will be beginning in September. So the class series is titled The History of Racism and Resistance in America, and it's a full course ranging from the origins of policing in America to the social construction of whiteness. This will begin September 17th, and it'll be finishing on December 10th. So it'll be every Thursday, of course, with the exception of Thanksgiving. But this series of 12 courses will really examine historical events that shape the discourse of white supremacy, especially as it relates to the development of structural racism in America. So we are very excited to be launching that soon. As you guys can see below, you can begin to support our class. Go ahead and follow the link to LaunchGood. That's launchgood.com/CAIR Michigan class. We want to provide this class to all of our followers and supporters for free. It'll be online, so we can all stay safe during these times. But as we said, we do think it's extremely vital that we as Muslims and non-Muslims, we all understand what our history is in America so that we know where we're going moving forward. Brother Dawood, Sister Amy, do you have any comments on the class? What are you most excited for, looking forward to?
I'm really excited, actually very, very excited about this class. I feel like it's a long time coming and it's very needed, and it's going to provide some very needed information. I know we have a tentative schedule of speakers lined up, and I'm very excited to see all of the diverse speakers that we have lined up speaking on subject matter that they're most proficient in and that they're excited about. And I think it's going to be very enlightening for even myself and many other people who are looking to learn about what happened, so that we can understand the political climate of today and how this administration, this Trump administration that we think, created the chaos that we see in our racial politics today, how we think it created that, but how it really didn't create that. It just brought it back to the forefront again. And I think that once we take these classes, people are really going to see how we got here and how dangerous continuing down this path that was created by this administration is.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to learning as well. And God willing, we're going to have some fabulous and qualified speakers, not just some bootleg speakers off the streets. For instance, we have Professor Said Khan, who is professor at Wayne State University, who's going to be teaching a couple of our courses, right? So I'm looking forward to learning myself. And what I think also the value of this class is not just, and of course we're targeting it for people in Michigan, but people outside of Michigan can watch as well. And I think especially given the time that many schools throughout, not just Michigan, but in America will not be going to a physical school, to a location, that this is a prime time or a good time where we can offer supplementary instruction, that there can be some additional educational resources given to many of our children who, if not, they're going to be learning online. A number of them will also be homeschooling, where parents aren't even going to be sending their children back through any system, but plan on doing homeschooling at home. So I'm really looking forward to the classes, and even for my own teenagers, God willing, I'm hoping that they're able to benefit. And God willing, in two of the sessions I'm really looking forward to is relating to some of the history of the Indigenous people or the Native Americans and some of their struggles, because we really can't talk about systemic racism and anti-Black racism and untangle that from racism against the Native people of this land, right? They're so intertwined. And then also the history of the Japanese Americans and Japanese internment, right? And I have and I had to learn how to pronounce her last name, but Sister Yori, who passed away a few years ago. What many people don't know is that she actually became Muslim, like the leading Japanese American activist that was organizing around reparations for Japanese Americans after internment. She actually had declared her Shahadatain. She had declared Islam. She actually, by the way, was in the Audubon Theater the day that Malcolm X was assassinated in Harlem, New York. She was there. She actually was the first person that got to his body after he was shot, because she was sitting in the front row along with Dr. Betty Shabazz and some of the Malcolm's daughters. She got there. She actually beat Dr. Betty to the front stage because Dr. Betty had her daughters that she had to get under control for a brief period of time before going to the stage. So the history is rich and deep, and I know a little teeny bit, but I'm looking forward to really benefiting from some of these fabulous speakers that we have. And as you also see the link scrolling at the bottom, like we're off because we're having professionals come and speak. We also have to offer them something for their time. Like some of them will be Muslims and some not, but we don't just expect everyone to teach us what I call free sabilillah. You know, people say fi sabilillah, oh, fi sabilillah, fi sabilillah. Well, many people try to take advantage of that and say free sabilillah. But if there's something that's of value, then we have to be able to compensate people who are academics and people who've studied, who've taken their time, who've done research, and also their time to present. So we're not even asking for much money for this launch good. This just for the bare minimum, just so that we can pay some modest stipends for these teachers. And of course, you could give more on CAIRMichigan.org besides on here. But we can't be a people that just expect something for nothing, right? And we know that some people have some monetary limitations at this particular time. Some people have been laid off from their jobs because of COVID-19 and things like this. But if you're able to give, I strongly hope that you would give to this Launch Good project, this Launch Good link, and please pray for the success of this, and share the link of this video, or share the link of this Launch Good campaign, even if you can't give. And I ask you, for those who are watching right now over Facebook, to share this link right now as you're listening. I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Be sure to look out for communication, posts, emails coming from us. We will be publishing the full class list soon, so that you guys can get a little peek of what we have to offer. And of course, you'll be able to sign up for the first class, which will be on September 17th. So in addition to your dua and your donations, of course, we would love your attendance, because we think this is vital and information that really anyone and everyone should know. So thank you so much for your time this evening. Thank you, Imam Dawood and Sister Amy. And inshallah, we will see all of you supporters and followers of ours at our next video. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.